The hospital room hummed with the sterile buzz of machines. But the sound couldn't drown out the scream lodged in my throat. My son, Ethan, barely 3 pounds, lay in his incubator, a tangle of tubes keeping him alive. I'd been pumping breast milk for weeks. Every drop a prayer for his survival until I learned my parents had given it to my sister, Claire, for her healthy newborn. I stood frozen, staring at the empty cooler bag on the hospital chair. My hands trembled as I clutched the latest bottle I'd pumped, the one I'd intended for Ethan's next feeding. The nurse's words echoed in my head. Your family took the milk you stored in the fridge. They said it was for your sister's baby. My vision blurred, not from exhaustion, but from a rage so raw it felt like my chest might split open. Claire's baby was fine, chubby and thriving, while Ethan fought for every breath. How could they? How could my own parents betray me like this? I'd always known Claire was the golden child. Growing up, she got the bigger room, the better gifts, the louder applause. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't complain when Mom and Dad overlooked my science fair win to cheer at Claire's dance recital. But this wasn't just favoritism. This was theft, a violation so deep it carved a hole in my heart. Ethan was my miracle, born at 28 weeks, his tiny fists no bigger than walnuts. Every ounce of milk I produced was a battle hours hooked to a pump, my body aching, my mind tethered to the hope that it would help him grow stronger. And they took it. For Claire. I stormed out of the room, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly, a tunnel of white walls and fluorescent lights. I found my parents in the waiting area, sitting with Claire, who cradled her daughter, Lily, in her arms. The sight of them smiling, cooing over Lily like nothing was wrong ignited something feral in me. You gave her my milk. My voice cracked, loud enough to startle a passing orderly. Mom's head snapped up, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. Dad shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tight. Claire wouldn't meet my gaze. Honey, we didn't think, Mom started. But I cut her off. Didn't think what? That Ethan needs it more. That he's fighting to live. My words were knives, sharp and reckless. I didn't care who heard. You took the one thing I could give him. How could you? Claire finally looked up, her face pale. It was just a little, she whispered. Lily was fussy, and I ran out. A little. I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Every drop was for Ethan. You knew that. I turned to my parents, my voice shaking with fury. You let her take it. You chose her, like always. Dad stood, his hands raised like he could calm a storm. Sarah, we're family. We're just trying to help everyone. Help. I spat. You helped Claire steal from your grandson. The word grandson hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Mom's face crumpled, but I felt no pity. Not then. Not when Ethan's monitors had beeped erratically that morning, reminding me how fragile his life was. I turned back to Claire, my sister, the one I'd once idolized. Her perfect life, her husband, her house, her healthy baby mocked me every time I saw her. You didn't even ask, I said, my voice low now. Dangerous. You just took. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Lily squirmed in her arms, oblivious to the war raging around her. I wanted to scream, to shake Claire until she understood the depth of her betrayal. But I didn't. I couldn't. Ethan needed me more than I needed revenge. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, my resolve hardening. They'd crossed a line, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive them. Back in Ethan's room, I sat by his incubator, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. The nurse, a kind woman named Linda, touched my shoulder. You okay, Sarah? She asked softly. I shook my head, tears spilling over. They took his milk. I whispered. My family. Linda didn't press, just squeezed my shoulder and left me alone with my son. I pressed my hand against the plastic wall of the incubator, wishing I could hold him, protect him from the world that had already failed him. That night, I didn't sleep. I pumped again, my body sore, my mind racing. Every whir of the machine felt like a defiance, a reclaiming of what was mine. But the wound was open, raw, and bleeding. My parents' faces, Claire's excuses, they haunted me. I'd always been the one to keep the peace, to swallow my hurt for the sake of family. Not anymore. Ethan deserved better. I deserved better. The next morning, I called my husband, Mark, who was working overtime to cover our medical bills. His voice was steady, but I heard the strain when I told him what happened. They did what? He said, his anger matching mine. Sarah, we need to set boundaries. Now. He was right. But the thought of confronting my family again made my stomach churn. They'd always had a way of twisting things, making me feel like the unreasonable one. But this time, I wouldn't back down. I started planning. No more shared hospital fridge. No more trusting them with Ethan's care. I'd lock up the milk, guard it like gold, and I'd make them face what they'd done not just to me, but to Ethan. The hospital social worker had mentioned support groups for NICU parents. Maybe they'd have advice on dealing with family who didn't understand. I needed allies. People who'd see my side, who'd remind me I wasn't crazy for feeling this betrayed. As the day wore on, Claire texted me, "I'm sorry. Sarah, can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash every ounce of pain she'd caused. But another part, though exhausted, grieving part, wanted to understand why. Why she thought it was okay to take what wasn't hers. Why my parents enabled her. Why our family, once so close, now felt like a battlefield. I didn't respond. Not yet. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out how to protect Ethan and myself from the people who were supposed to love us most. The hospital room was quiet now, save for the soft beeps of Ethan's monitors. I leaned close to his incubator, whispering, "I'll fight for you, baby, no matter what." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about milk. It was about trust, loyalty, and the lengths I'd go to for my son. The hospital became my fortress, Ethan my reason to keep going. Every day, I sat by his incubator, counting his breaths, memorizing the curve of his tiny fingers. But the betrayal clung to me like damp air, heavy and inescapable. My parents and Claire kept their distance after the confrontation, but their absence didn't soothe the ache. It sharpened it. They hadn't apologized, not really. Claire's text sat unanswered in my phone, a ticking bomb I wasn't ready to defuse. Mark arrived that evening, his face drawn from a long shift. He hugged me tightly, his work-roughened hands grounding me. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice low but firm. "You don't have to do this alone." I nodded, but the weight of it all, Ethan's fragility, my family's betrayal, pressed down harder. Mark suggested we talk to the hospital social worker, Ms. Rivera, about securing the milk. It felt like a small step, but a necessary one. I couldn't risk another theft. Ms. Rivera was a calm presence, her office a cramped nook filled with pamphlets and a wilting plant. She listened as I poured out the story, my voice breaking when I described Ethan's struggle. "You're not overreacting," she said, her eyes kind but resolute. "This is a violation of trust, especially in such a vulnerable time." She helped us arrange a locked storage unit in the NICU for my milk, accessible only by me and the nurses. It felt like a victory, but a hollow one. Locking up my son's lifeline shouldn't have been necessary. Back in Ethan's room, I watched the nurses handle him with a gentleness that made my heart ache. They were strangers, yet they cared for him better than my own family had. I started attending the NICU support group Ms. Rivera recommended. The other parents, tired, hopeful, broken, became my lifeline. One woman, Jen, whose daughter was also premature, shared her own story of family drama. My brother told me I was selfish for focusing on my baby instead of his wedding, she said, rolling her eyes. Family doesn't always get it. Her words were a balm, reminding me I wasn't alone. But at home, the tension grew. Mark and I lived in a small apartment, cluttered with baby gear we couldn't yet use. My parents called, wanting to visit, but I wasn't ready. They need to understand what they did, I told Mark, my voice shaking. He agreed, but I saw the strain in his eyes. He loved my parents, had always seen them as his own. This was breaking him too. A week later, Claire showed up at the hospital unannounced. I was pumping, the machine's rhythmic hum a backdrop to my thoughts. When she knocked, her face was puffy, her eyes red. "Sarah, please," she said, stepping inside. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I set the pump down, my hand shaking. "Then why did you take it?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. "You knew it was for Ethan." She fidgeted, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Lily wasn't latching well, and I was desperate. "Mom said you had extra, that it wouldn't be a big deal." Her words hit like a slap. Mom said, of course. Mom, who always smoothed over Claire's mistakes, who made excuses for her golden child. It was a big deal, I said, standing now, my voice rising. Ethan's life depends on that milk. You have no idea what it's like to watch your baby fight for every breath, to pray he makes it through the night. Tears welled in her eyes. But I didn't stop. You took from him. And Mom and Dad let you. Claire sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't think." "That's the problem," I cut in. "You didn't think about anyone but yourself." The words felt good, sharp, like they could cut through the fog of her excuses. But they didn't erase the hurt. She left soon after, promising to make it right. But I didn't believe her. Not yet. That night, I dreamed of Ethan, healthy and laughing, running through a park I'd never seen. I woke with tears on my cheeks, the hospital's sterile smell pulling me back to reality. Ethan was still fighting, and I was still alone in this battle. My parents called again, leaving voicemails I didn't answer. Their voices, once comforting, now felt like intrusions. I needed space, but I also needed answers. Why had they chosen Claire over Ethan? Over me? The next day, I met with Jen from the support group for coffee in the hospital cafeteria. She listened as I vented, her own exhaustion mirroring mine. "You need to confront them head on," she said, stirring her coffee. "Not just Claire, but your parents. They need to see the damage." I knew she was right, but the thought of facing them made my stomach knot. What if they didn't care? What if they chose Claire again? Mark and I talked it over that night, huddled on our couch. He suggested a family meeting, somewhere neutral, where we could lay everything bare. "They need to hear you, Sarah," he said. "Not just what they did, but how it made you feel." I agreed, but dread settled in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding conflict, swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. Now, peace felt like surrender. We set the meeting for the following weekend at a quiet cafe near the hospital. I spent the days leading up to it preparing, writing down everything I wanted to say. The words poured out: anger, pain, betrayal, love for Ethan. I didn't know if they'd listen, but I had to try. For Ethan. For myself. As the meeting approached, I felt a shift inside me. The anger was still there, but so was a fierce determination. I wasn't just fighting for milk or apologies. I was fighting for my son's place in our family, for my right to be heard. Ethan deserved a mother who'd stand up for him, no matter the cost. And I was ready to be that mother. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and cinnamon, a stark contrast to the hospital's antiseptic sting. I sat at a corner table, my hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched, waiting for my family. Mark sat beside me, his presence steadying, though his jaw was tight. The meeting was my idea, but every nerve in my body screamed to run. Facing my parents and Claire meant ripping open wounds I wasn't sure would heal. They arrived together. A unit. Their faces a mix of guilt and defensiveness. Mom's eyes were red. Dad's shoulders slumped. And Claire clutched a water bottle like a lifeline. No one spoke as they sat down. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clatter of dishes in the background. I'd rehearsed my words 100 times, but now they felt stuck, tangled in my throat. I need you to understand what you did, I finally said, my voice low but steady. You took Ethan's milk. You took his chance to grow stronger. And you did it without even asking me. My eyes locked on Mom's. Then Dad's. Then Claire's. None of them looked away. But none of them spoke either. Mom broke first, her voice trembling. Sarah, we thought we were helping. Claire was struggling, and we didn't want to bother you with Ethan so sick. Her words were meant to soothe, but they burned. Helping Claire. Always Claire. Even at Ethan's expense. Helping, I said, my voice rising. You chose Claire's baby over mine. Ethan's not just sick. Mom. He could die? The word hung in the air, raw and ugly. Dad flinched, and Claire's eyes filled with tears. But I kept going. You didn't think about what I was going through. Pumping every 2 hours. Praying it's enough to keep him alive. You just acted like it was yours to give away. Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped. We didn't know it was that serious. Sarah, we thought you had plenty. Plenty. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Every drop is a fight. You don't get it because you didn't ask. You just assumed. Like always. That Claire's needs come first. I turned to my sister, who was staring at the table. And you. You knew it was for Ethan. You could have said no. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. I was desperate. Lily wouldn't stop crying. And I thought it wouldn't hurt. Her words were a knife, twisting deeper. She thought it wouldn't hurt. As if Ethan's life was an afterthought. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, urging me to keep going. It did hurt, I said, my voice breaking. It hurt Ethan. It hurt me. And it hurt us. I gestured to all of them. The family I barely recognized. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Mom sobbed, covering her face. Dad reached for her, but his eyes stayed on me, searching. What can we do? Sarah, tell us how to fix this. I wanted to scream that they couldn't fix it, that the trust was shattered. But I thought of Ethan, his tiny body fighting in that incubator. He needed a family, even a broken one. Start by listening, I said. Really listening. Ethan comes first now. Not Claire. Not Lily. Not anyone else. And you need to respect my boundaries. No more taking. No more assuming. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever you need. Sarah. I swear. Her sincerity felt real. But I wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. The meeting ended with promises, vague ones from my parents. Earnest ones from Claire. I didn't feel lighter. But I felt heard. That was something. Mark and I left the cafe, the weight of the conversation lingering. You did good, he said, pulling me close. I leaned into him, grateful for his strength. But the hurt still gnawed at me. Back at the hospital, Ethan had a good day. His oxygen levels were stable, and the nurses said he'd gained an ounce. It was a small victory, but it felt like a mountain. I sat by his incubator, telling him about the meeting, about how I'd fought for him. You're my world, I whispered, my fingers tracing the outline of his tiny hand through the plastic. The days that followed were a blur of routine pumping. Visiting Ethan, attending the support group. Jen became a regular confidant, her blunt humor a lifeline. Family's messy, she said one day, passing me a granola bar. But you're doing right by Ethan. That's what matters. Her words stuck with me, a reminder that I was enough, even when my family made me feel like I wasn't. Claire started texting more. Small gesture sent apology here. A photo of Lily there. I responded sparingly. still guarding my heart. My parents visited the hospital, but I kept them at a distance, letting them see Ethan but not touching the milk cooler. They seemed to understand, or at least they didn't argue. It was progress, but it wasn't forgiveness. Mark and I talked about the future, about what family meant now. "We'll build our own," he said one night, his voice fierce. "You, me, Ethan. That's enough." I wanted to believe him, but the wound was still fresh. I needed time, and I needed Ethan to get stronger. As the weeks passed, Ethan's condition improved. He was breathing better, his weight creeping up. The doctors started talking about a possible discharge date, a light at the end of the tunnel. But the shadow of my family's betrayal lingered, a reminder that love could hurt as much as it healed. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to fight for Ethan, for myself, for the family we'd become. Ethan's incubator felt like a second home. Its hum a lullaby I clung to. Every day brought small victories, another ounce gained. A tube removed, but the shadow of my family's betrayal loomed large. I'd set boundaries, locked the milk away, confronted them, but the hurt didn't fade. It was a bruise, tender and deep, coloring every interaction with my parents and Claire. Mark was my rock, but even he couldn't shield me from the memories. I'd catch myself staring at the cooler bag, imagining Claire opening it, taking what wasn't hers. The image burned, fueling a resentment I didn't know how to release. I wanted to move forward, for Ethan's sake, but forgiveness felt like a betrayal of my own pain. The support group became my sanctuary. Jen and the others understood the chaos of NICU life, the way it stripped you bare. One evening, as we shared stories over lukewarm coffee, Jen leaned in. "You're carrying too much, Sarah," she said. "You don't have to forgive them yet. Just don't let it eat you alive." Her words hit hard. Was I letting this consume me? Was my anger hurting Ethan more than my family had? I started journaling, pouring my thoughts on a paper. Pages filled with rage, fear, love for Ethan. Writing helped, but it also forced me to face the truth. My family wasn't just Claire's enablers. They were flawed, human, caught in their own web of loyalties. Mom's favoritism, Dad's passivity, Claire's desperation. They weren't malicious, but they were careless. And that carelessness had nearly cost Ethan. Claire kept trying to reach out. She sent a care package, diapers, a soft blanket, a note promising to respect my boundaries. I didn't open it. Not yet. Her apologies felt like drops in an ocean of hurt. But one day, she showed up at the hospital with a thermos of homemade soup. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice small. "I just want to be here for you." I let her sit with me, but I kept my guard up. We talked about Lily, about Ethan, but not about the milk. Not yet. My parents were harder. They visited Ethan, their faces heavy with guilt, but their apologies were vague, tinged with excuses. "We didn't understand," Mom said once, her hands twisting. "We're learning." I wanted to believe them, but trust was a fragile thing, and mine was shattered. I let them see Ethan, but I didn't let them close. Not yet. Mark pushed for family therapy, an idea I resisted at first. "It's not about fixing them," he said one night, as we lay in bed, the apartment quiet around us. "It's about you getting to say everything you need to, with someone to keep it fair." I agreed, reluctantly. An MS. Rivera connected us with a therapist, Dr. Ellis, who specialized in family conflict. Our first session was set for the following week, and I dreaded it. The day before the session, Ethan had a setback. His oxygen levels dipped, and the doctors ordered more tests. I sat by his incubator, my heart pounding, as the nurses worked. "He's a fighter," Linda, the nurse, said, her voice calm but firm. I clung to that, but the fear was relentless. What if I lost him? What if all this pain me family's betrayal? My exhaustion was for nothing. The therapy session was tense. Dr. Ellis, a soft-spoken woman with sharp eyes, asked us to share one truth. I went first, my voice steady despite the tears. I feel like you chose Claire over Ethan, I said, looking at my parents. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Mom cried. Dad stared at the floor, and Claire reached for my hand. I pulled away. Mom spoke next, her voice shaky. We didn't mean to hurt you, Sarah. We thought we were balancing everyone's needs. Dad nodded, adding, we didn't see how serious it was for Ethan. Their words felt like half-truths. But Dr. Ellis pressed them to listen. Really listen. To my pain. Claire's turn was harder. I was selfish, she admitted, tears falling. I was so caught up in being a new mom. I didn't think about you or Ethan. Her honesty surprised me, but it didn't erase the hurt. The session ended with no resolution, just a promise to keep talking. I left feeling raw but lighter, like I'd shed a layer of anger. Mark squeezed my hand as we drove home. You were brave, he said. I didn't feel brave, but I felt seen. Ethan's condition stabilized over the next few days, and the doctors were optimistic again. I spent every moment I could with him, reading stories, singing softly, telling him about the world waiting for him. My family kept their distance, respecting the boundaries I'd set, but their presence lingered in my thoughts. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was starting to see a path forward, not for them, but for me and Ethan. Ethan's tiny hand curled around my finger, a small miracle that anchored me. He was gaining weight, his breath steadier, but every beep of his monitor reminded me how fragile this hope was. The therapy session had cracked open something in me, a willingness to face my family. Not for reconciliation, but for clarity. I needed to understand why they'd done it. Not just for Ethan, but for the part of me that still loved them despite everything. Dr. Ellis scheduled weekly sessions, and the second one was harder. I brought a photo of Ethan, his tiny body dwarfed by tubes, and placed it on the table. This is what you risked, I said, my voice steady but sharp. Every drop of milk was for him. Mom broke down, sobbing into her hands, while Dad stared at the photo, his face pale. Claire reached for it, then stopped, as if afraid to touch the evidence of her mistake. I didn't know, Mom said, her voice muffled. I thought you were strong, Sarah. I thought you could handle it. Her words stung, revealing the pedestal they'd always put me on, the reliable one who never needed help. I'd spent my life proving I could handle anything. But this was different. This was Ethan's life. You didn't ask, I said. You assumed I'd be fine, like always. But I'm not. I'm terrified every day. Dr. Ellis nodded, urging me to keep going. I told them about the nights I lay awake, haunted by the thought of losing Ethan, about the pain of pumping milk only to have it stolen. For once, they listened, had no excuses, no deflections. Claire spoke next, her voice trembling. I was jealous, she admitted, the words shocking me. You were so strong, Sarah, even with Ethan so sick. I felt like a failure as a mom, and I took it out on you. Her confession was a gut punch. Jealousy. I'd been drowning, and she envied me. But as she talked about her struggles with Lily, her fear of not being enough, I saw a glimpse of the sister I'd once known. Flawed and human. Dad was quieter, his guilt heavier. We didn't want to burden you, he said. We thought we were protecting you. Protecting me by betraying me. The irony was bitter, but I saw their logic, twisted as it was. They'd always seen me as the strong one, the one who didn't need them. But I did. I needed them to choose Ethan, to choose me. The session ended with a plan, small steps to rebuild trust. Claire offered to help with errands, to stay out of the hospital unless invited. My parents promised to respect my boundaries, to check in before acting. I didn't trust their promises, but I agreed to try. For Ethan. Back at the hospital, Ethan's progress gave me strength. The doctors removed another tube, and I got to hold him for the first time. his tiny body warm against my chest. Tears fell as I whispered to him, promising a life full of love. Mark was there, his eyes shining with pride. "We're getting there," he said, and I believed him. But the hurt lingered. I journaled more, writing letters to my family I'd never send, spilling my anger and love onto the page. Jen, from the support group, read one and hugged me. "You're allowed to feel both," she said. "You can love them and still be mad." Her words freed something in me, a permission to hold space for my pain without letting it define me. Claire kept her word, running errands, sending thoughtful texts. One day, she brought a stuffed bear for Ethan, leaving it with the nurse when I wasn't ready to see her. The gesture was small but heavy, a step toward atonement. My parents were slower, their visits cautious, their words careful. I let them see Ethan, but I watched them closely, guarding my heart and his. The NICU became less of a prison, more of a bridge to Ethan's future. The nurses taught me how to care for him, preparing me for the day he'd come home. That day felt closer, a beacon pulling me through the fog of betrayal. But forgiveness, that was still a distant shore. I could see it, but I wasn't ready to sail there. Mark and I started dreaming again, talking about Ethan's first birthday, his first steps. We'd build a life for him, one where he'd never feel second best. The therapy sessions continued, each one peeling back layers of pain and misunderstanding. I began to see my family not as villains, but as people who'd made a terrible mistake. It didn't erase the hurt, but it made it easier to breathe. As Ethan grew stronger, so did I. The anger was still there, but it was quieter, a hum beneath the surface. I was learning to carry it without letting it consume me. For Ethan, for Mark, for myself, I'd keep fighting not just against my family's betrayal, but for the family we were becoming. Ethan's eyes opened for the first time, a fleeting moment that stole my breath. They were blue, like Mark's, and they held a spark of life that made my heart soar. He was still in the NICU, still tethered to machines, but he was fighting, and so was I. The betrayal lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. But Ethan's progress was a light that kept me moving forward. Therapy with Dr. Ellis became a weekly ritual, a space to untangle the mess of my family. Each session revealed more Mom's guilt over favoring Claire, Dad's fear of conflict, Claire's struggle to find her place as a new mom. I listened, but my walls stayed up. Their apologies were starting to feel real, but trust was a slow rebuild, brick by fragile brick. One afternoon, Claire asked to meet me outside the hospital. I agreed, reluctantly, choosing a park bench far from the NICU's sterile hum. She looked different, less polished, more vulnerable. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started, her voice steady, "about how I took from Ethan. I can't undo it, Sarah, but I want to make it right." She handed me a journal, her handwriting on the cover. "It's for you." I wrote down everything, why I did it, how I felt. I thought it might help you understand. I took the journal, my fingers tracing the cover. Part of me wanted to throw it back, to tell her words couldn't fix this. But I saw the effort in her eyes, the weight of her guilt. "I'll read it," I said, my voice neutral. "But don't expect me to forgive you yet." She nodded, accepting that, and we sat in silence, watching leaves fall. That night, I read her journal, page after page of her fears failing Lily, losing herself in motherhood, envying my strength. She wrote about the moment she took the milk, how Mom had encouraged her, saying I wouldn't mind. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a window into her desperation. I closed the journal, tears falling. I hated her less, but I still hurt. My parents were trying too. They started attending a parenting class for grandparents, learning about premature babies and NICU life. Mom sent me articles. Dad offered to cover hospital parking fees. Small gestures, but they showed effort. I let them visit Ethan more, always under my watch. Their love for him was real, but I wasn't ready to let them back in fully. The NICU staff became my extended family. Linda, the nurse, celebrated every milestone with me, Ethan's first bottle feed, his first day without oxygen. She shared stories of other parents who'd faced family drama, reminding me that healing was possible. "You're doing right by him," she said one day, adjusting Ethan's tiny hat. "That's what counts." Mark and I leaned on each other, our bond growing stronger through the chaos. We started planning for Ethan's homecoming, painting his nursery a soft blue, assembling a crib we'd bought on faith. The thought of bringing him home was a lifeline, but it also terrified me. What if my family's betrayal followed us there? What if I couldn't protect him? The support group kept me grounded. Jen and I started meeting outside the hospital, swapping stories over coffee. She told me about forgiving her brother, not for him, but for herself. "Holding on to anger is like carrying a hot coal," she said. "It burns you more than them." I wasn't ready to let go, but her words planted a seed. Therapy continued, and I started sharing more, not just anger, but fear, hope, love. Dr. Ellis helped us navigate boundaries, teaching my family to ask instead of assume. Claire offered to fund a breast pump for home use, a gesture I accepted after much debate. Mom and Dad started checking in before visiting, respecting the locked cooler. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Ethan's discharge date was set for a month out, a milestone that felt both thrilling and daunting. The doctors warned us he'd need careful monitoring, but he was ready to leave the NICU. I spent every moment preparing, learning to use his medical equipment, memorizing his feeding schedule. My family offered to help, but I wasn't ready to lean on them. Not yet. One evening, as I sat by Ethan's incubator, Claire's journal in my lap, I realized something. Forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about me. About freeing myself from the weight of their betrayal so I could be the mother Ethan needed. I wasn't there yet, but I could see the path. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for Ethan, but for us all. The day Ethan came home was a quiet triumph, a moment etched in sunlight and tears. His tiny body, still fragile but stronger, nestled in my arms as Mark drove us to our apartment. The nursery waited, blue walls glowing under a mobile of stars. But even as I celebrated, the shadow of my family's betrayal lingered, a weight I carried alongside Ethan's car seat. We settled into a new rhythm, one of feedings and monitors and sleepless nights. Ethan thrived, his cheeks filling out, his eyes bright with curiosity. Every smile was a victory, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard. But my family's presence was a question mark. I'd let them visit, but trust was a slow rebuild, each interaction a test. Therapy with Dr. Ellis continued, a lifeline through the chaos. My parents were learning, their apologies growing more specific. "We should have asked you," Mom said one session, her voice thick with regret. "We didn't see how much you were carrying." Dad nodded, his usual silence replaced by a quiet resolve. "We're here now, Sarah. Whatever you need." Their words were a start, but I needed actions to match. Claire was the most persistent. She kept her distance when I asked, but she showed up in small ways: groceries left at our door, a hand-knitted blanket for Ethan. Her journal had cracked something open in me, a willingness to see her not as the golden child, but as a sister struggling under her own weight. One day, she asked to meet at the park again. I agreed, bringing Ethan in his stroller, his tiny hat shielding his eyes. "I want to be better," Claire said, sitting beside me. "Not just for Lily, but for you and Ethan." Her voice was steady, her eyes clear. She talked about therapy of her own, about unpacking her jealousy and learning to celebrate my strength instead of resenting it. I listened, my heart softening but not fully open. "I'm trying," I said, "but it's hard. What you did, it broke something." "I know," she said, tears falling. "I'll keep showing up, Sarah, as long as it takes." I nodded, not ready to forgive, but ready to let her try. My parents followed her lead, their actions more deliberate. They attended Ethan's checkups, asked questions about his care, respected my rules. Mom started a scrapbook for Ethan, filling it with photos and notes about his progress. Dad offered to build a ramp for the stroller, a practical gesture that meant more than words. I saw their love for Ethan, and slowly, I began to see their love for me. The support group remained my anchor. Jen and I celebrated Ethan's homecoming with cupcakes, laughing about the chaos of new motherhood. "You're rewriting your story," she said, her eyes warm. "Not just with Ethan, but with your family." She was right. I was learning to hold space for both love and pain, to build a future without letting the past define it. Mark and I grew closer, our partnership forged in the fire of Ethan's survival. We talked about our dreams, vacations, holidays, Ethan's first day of school. We also talked about my family, about how to let them back in without losing myself. "You set the pace," Mark said one night, his hand in mine. "They'll follow." His faith in me was a gift, one I leaned into. Months passed, and Ethan grew stronger, his laughter filling our home. The betrayal still stung, but it was no longer the loudest thing in my heart. I started inviting my family over, small visits that felt like experiments. Claire held Ethan for the first time, her hands gentle, her eyes full of awe. Mom and Dad watched, their smiles cautious but real. We were rebuilding, not the family we'd been, but something new. Forgiveness came slowly, not as a moment, but as a process. It wasn't about erasing the hurt, but about choosing to move forward despite it. I forgave Claire first, her persistence wearing down my walls. My parents took longer, their mistakes deeper, but their efforts were undeniable. I didn't forget, but I learned to let go, for Ethan's sake and my own. One evening, as I rocked Ethan to sleep, I looked at his peaceful face and felt a quiet strength. We'd survived not just the NICU, but the betrayal, the anger, the rebuilding. My family wasn't perfect, but they were trying. And so was I. Ethan was my heart, my reason. And together, we'd write a story stronger than the one that had tried to break us.